over there in Adelaide. So we do appreciate you staying up and doing this session for us. Thank you. Heidi, the screen is all yours.
Awesome. Now, my PowerPoint has decided to pick a different screen to present on. So let me just move the Teams window around. It'll be easier then. And then we just move this one over here. Oh, there we go. All right. So now share screen. We are going to want.
And while Heidi shares the screen, I would also like to welcome Ginger, who's joined us as well. Hi, Ginger.
Hi, Ginger. Is that coming up okay?
Yes, it's good.
Awesome. Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. As the excellent introduction we had just before, I'm talking about sensitivity labels today. So we're going to talk a little bit about what they look like, what they are, and specific to the Power Platform, but in this case, Power BI. So as you heard, I am an ALM DLM enthusiast, which is application lifecycle management, database lifecycle management. Huge fan of all things DevOps and all things data and business intelligence. And I currently work as a consultant here in Australia for a company called Exposé Data Exposed. If you do want to reach me on Twitter. At Heidi Hasting, you can find me on there. I probably have a different haircut and hair color, but that is me. So before we go into the actual tooling, we need to know what sensitivity labels are. So if you haven't played with Office 365 and the information protection in that space, you possibly don't know what they are. But basically, they're a label. So today we're going to talk about what they are, what they look like, how we set them up across Power BI, and a little bit in the Purview space. So they are just a label. In some cases, they are both a label and security. So predominantly with Office 365 and a little bit in Power BI, security can be applied to that label, and they call it a policy. But the crux of sensitivity labels are just that, they're a label. So you can use them as a way to provide metadata against your reporting artifacts. So it might be you're classifying your contents as commercial sensitive, it might be HR confidential or financial confidential, or it might be that you want to classify the data in terms of gold standard, it's data that's been reviewed, happy to be used in reporting, or it's more of a bronze standard where you go, look, not too sure about this data, use it at your own risk. We've not reviewed it, but it's available to you. So it is just that, a way to classify and label your data artifacts. When it comes to Power BI and the data platform, we can do that for Excel files, for Power BI files, for Azure SQL, and the like. Good old PowerPoint switching slides on me. And we can also use it to do that protection layer. Now, you can't do that in all contexts, but you can in some cases. So you might say this label is available to only these people and they can access it offline or online, and then certain things like watermarks, or no, even though a Power BI report has this label applied, only these users can access the contents. So we'll get into that a bit later, but ultimately it's just a label. So firstly, licensing. Yes, it is a bit of a yuck one because it's kind of it depends. Basically, if you have an E5 license at your tenant level, because with the sensitivity labels, even though you're applying them in Power BI, they're actually the sensitivity labels from the Office 365 area. So under the Office 365, it's called the Azure Information Protection or the Microsoft Information Protection, and that's where the sensitivity labels fall in. So you've got to look at your Office 365 licensing. So that might be an E5 or an Azure Information Protection P1 and P2. And I know what this is doing. It's picking up the timings from here and applying them to my presentation. And I'll just put that back on. Cool. So when it comes to Power BI, there are specific ones. Make sure you've got the right license. You only need one. So one E5 license on a tenant will give you access to sensitivity labels. If you don't have a license that allows that functionality, It won't be enabled at the tenant and also won't be enabled in Power BI. I'm going to use an E5 for my demo today, and then when you're looking at it from a user using the label in Power BI, they have to be a Power BI Pro user or Premium per user licensed user. Otherwise, they can't actually use the labels. When it comes to working with sensitivity labels, Microsoft provide this lovely process flow. So your initial step is your administration. You need to actually create the label and then publish it so that other users can use the label, because just creating the label just means you've got a label on your tenant, but no one can use it. Once you publish the label, that says, okay, that label is now available for use, and it's available to these users groups or combination of both. Once you've done that step, you can then look at it from an end user perspective. So that's your report developers or your data administrators or your governance area of staff. They can then apply those labels to the data artifacts, in this case, Power BI reports, dashboards, and then they can publish them to the service and it's available there. And then the last one is all around how third party and other products interact with the sensitivity labels. And for more details, you can go to the Microsoft documentation. So the very first step we've got to do is actually create a label. So creating a sensitivity label is all done through the Office 365 Admin Center. So I'm going to take you through what that looks like. For most companies, that could be done by your global administrator or your cloud administrator. It's not necessarily going to be done by your data professionals within the organization, but I think it's important to see what it looks like so you know when you're communicating with those users within your organization, or you want to try it out yourself, you know what the settings are and where they are. So this is the Office 365 Admin Center. This is your entry portal that you see. From there, you're going to go into compliance, because information protection comes under the compliance aspect. From the compliance, this is your entry screen for that. And then you'll see down the bottom here, there's information protection. If by chance you hit information governance, you will see label screens there. They're different labels. They're not sensitivity labels. So you want to go into information protection. Within the information protection area, you get the option of the label, and you'll see here there are no labels created in this tenant. This is a brand new fresh tenant for the screenshots. You can spin up a trial tenant if you wanted to have a go at this, and you'll have no sensitivity labels there by default. And you do see that you can extend the labeling functionality into Azure Purview. So we're going to go ahead and create that label. There are a number of things that you get to pick and choose when you are creating labels. So you've got your initial configuration areas like your label name and description, and you get the added benefit of applying a description both for your end users but also for your administrators. So this name, you want to be quite user-friendly and easily relatable, because that's what's going to appear in all the drop-downs in the products as to what they're picking, and it's going to be the label that the users initially see when they see a sensitivity label's been applied. There's the scope. The scope here, because we're talking about Office 365 sensitivity labels, the scope is also for things like files and emails. So those are files in your OneDrive and your SharePoint, but then it's also groups and sites, again, Teams and SharePoint, and then it's what they call schematized data sets. So that's your Azure Purview, Azure SQL. There's also protection for those files, whether you want to encrypt them, whether you want to apply a watermark. With Power BI, the watermark is somewhat irrelevant, but if you have things like Excel and Word, the watermark might be more applicable. And then you've got your encryption settings, whether you're going to allow offline access and what that offline access is, and publish. Because as we said earlier, without publishing the label, you get nothing. Then when we publish a label, it's referred to as a policy. So even though you're publishing a label, you're actually attaching a policy to that label, which allows you to specify which labels fall under the policy, who then has access to use that label, and that can be users, user or users, group or groups, and then what policies you want to apply, and whether it's a mandatory requirement across the relevant areas. So for us, just Power BI, but you might want to do it in other areas of your org. And then additional information is where you can specify a URL to provide additional information about that specific policy and label. So it might be your internal SharePoint site, or it might be an online website that you have, but it's just a URL setting for that extra. So if we go back to what our Office 365 compliance area looked like, and we then go into that create label option, we can go straight through all the different settings. So we'll create a label. These are the options. As I said earlier, you get your name, your display name, your description for both user and admin. So I'm going to put confidential and a few little bits of information, and I'll just whiz through this so you get to see what it looks like as you set it up, and then more details when we get to actually applying it. So once we've created the label name, we specify the scope, the context. So when it comes to Power BI, these are all somewhat irrelevant except for the bottom one, because the files up the top is not actually referring to Power BI files. It's more referring to your files stored in OneDrive, which actually could be your Power BI files, but for me, I don't put them in OneDrive, but that is an option. The other two settings aren't so much because they're around groups and SharePoint. If we were doing Purview, we would want to enable the bottom. We then get the option to protect those files, whether we want to apply watermarks. I've chosen to encrypt them and mark the contents of the file with a watermark just for demo purposes. And then when you are configuring the encryption, you get the option to say when do you want the settings to take account, and then whether that has an expiry. So you might say, okay, users can access the content offline and only for a day. So we'll see that a little bit later, what that screenshot looks like. But basically, that means if you say offline for a day, after a day, it's going to go back and check the Office 365 tenant to say, does this user still have access to that label and therefore access to the contents? That's kind of relevant when you're talking about export to Excel, because that's where you would want, if they are exporting the contents of, say, a Power BI report to Excel, and you've got a sensitivity label, you might want it to recheck the settings every so often. Then we specify the permission set, who has access to use the label. So you can say users or groups, or you can say all authenticated users, and there is the ability to apply specific permissions. I haven't chosen to in this demo. And then this is just, as I said earlier, if you wanted to apply expiration on your offline access, this is what that screen would look like. So you pick an option, say number of days, and then you specify the finer details for that config. When we get through now, we're looking at the content marking. So the reason I've highlighted this screen is just to let you know that when you apply a watermark, the options are very minimal. So you can see here we can only specify the font size, font color, and text layout. And that font color palette is only about 10 different colors. And it doesn't actually appear on Power BI. So if you were to apply a watermark to a sensitivity label, it's not like if you applied it to a Word document where it actually puts the label in the background. You don't see it at all on the Power BI one. It doesn't have the context of the watermark. The last few screens are all about automatically labeling of files and emails. Not relevant to today because we're talking about the Power BI files in the service, but it's just to be aware that you're applying settings here that apply all throughout your Office 365 tenant as well as your Power BI area. So skip this one because it's just SharePoint sites and teams, which we're not touching, and then schematized data sets. You'll see here I don't have it selected, but I will show you what it looks like in Azure Purview later using a different tenant, one tenant that I already had set up with a few labels. And you get your final review screen. So at this point, we just have a label that's created. It's sitting there on our Office 365 tenant, but it has no security. So now we're going to publish the label, which lets us say, okay, this label is now available, and what are the restrictions that we want to apply? Who gets to use it and when do they get to use it? So we'll say publish the label, and we're transitioned into the creating a policy screen. So you see that up the top. We first pick what labels we're applying this policy to, because you can roll out more than one label at a time. When you think about rolling out a new governance strategy, you might be saying, all right, we're about to roll out across the department, across the org. These are the new labels we want to apply, and we can publish them all with the same settings if they're applicable to all users in the org. If you want more fine-grained, like you might want confidential HR versus confidential finance, you probably don't want to put them in the same policy because you want to apply a different permission set. So anywhere where you want to apply different settings, you split them out. In this case, I'm going to publish it for all users on my tenant to access, and then I'm not going to specify any restrictions in terms of required content across the board. But be aware of this first one up the top. I think this is probably recommended to turn it on because you want to know when someone removes a label or lowers the classification. And you think about that where you've got data that might be highly sensitive or commercial in confidence, and someone then switches it to say public or unclassified, then you want to know that they've done that, and you might want a reason for that. And the really great thing is that this information then sits in the Activity Explorer within Office 365. So you can go in and analyze that over the course of time. So you can review your governance strategies to identify perhaps where a label needs to be changed or where people are unclear as to how a classification functions. This one here about requiring Power BI content to have a label, I really like that one, but I'd treat it with caution. You might want to do a soft rollout, initially put the labeling in place, communicate to your users that these are the labels available and what they mean and when to apply them and how to apply them. And then say 3, 6, 12 months later, mark it as required if you need that for your internal policies. This is default labeling against documents. Documents, think Word, Excel, PowerPoint going into OneDrive. Then you've got labeling for emails, because as we said, this is the information protection across Office 365. And this one is the big one. This is a default label for Power BI. So you might want to default apply everything with a highly sensitive label, i.e. confidential, to kind of force your users to think about what the sensitivity label setting should be, and then change it after the fact, as opposed to having no labeling applied and potentially not knowing what's in a report in terms of the sensitivity of the contents. So this is treat with caution, but it's really handy for a governance rollout to be able to apply a default label. Then we specify the name of that policy and a brief description, review the settings and publish, and away we go. So now within 24 hours, for me it's been quite quick, but my tenant only includes me, myself and I. So the rollout can be quite quick, but do think about potentially 24 hours before it reaches all your users across your org. So there we go. That's the Office 365 Admin Center. That's us actually setting up our label to start with and then applying a policy. And you saw there we had a little bit of security, so we can specify who can use the label to apply to an artifact, and then potentially whether they can view it offline or online. So just be aware of that, and then we'll talk about a little bit further down the course of today where the gotchas are in that specific security and where it does and doesn't apply. But this is what we would have seen after that. So now we're going to talk about specific to Power BI. So Power BI sensitivity labels doesn't apply to everything. So as you can see from this screen, it applies to most things, but workbooks, no-go zones. Workbooks don't have a sensitivity label that can be applied. Even though a workbook is an Excel file uploaded to the Power BI service, it can have a sensitivity label applied when you're working with it in Office, in Excel, but as soon as you publish it up to the service knows nothing about it. So just be mindful of that. Workbooks, no sensitivity labels when it comes to publishing them in Power BI service. Paginated reports, you can apply the label, but you don't apply it inside the paginated report builder. You apply it inside service only, as opposed to everything else, which you can apply in the desktop, publish it to the service, or apply directly in the service. And unfortunately, Power BI Report Server, the desktop product for that, doesn't support sensitivity labels. So if you're on-prem, unfortunately, not a good scenario there. When we're in Power BI Desktop, this is what the sensitivity labeling will look like. This is the area of the GUI that you want to look for. So the left-hand side is indicating grayed out, not accessible functionality. 2 reasons for that. Tenant doesn't have any sensitivity labels set up or no licensing applicable, or you're not logged in into Power BI Desktop, because Power BI Desktop needs to interrogate the Office 365 settings to identify what labels to make available to you. Or lastly, you have no licensing that is relevant to allow sensitivity labels. So if you didn't have an E5 or Azure Information Protection, you wouldn't see it. The right-hand side is when it's enabled. This is in Power BI Desktop. Once you have sensitivity labels set up, you're with an account that has access to a label, and you have Pro or Premium per user, then you get the ability to select what sensitivity label you want to apply to that report, and it's only the one. So once you go in and you build a Power BI report in Power BI Desktop, go and you select the sensitivity label you want to apply. So we apply confidential, and then straight away the status bar down the bottom will show confidential in the status on the left-hand side. So that's how you can see that a Power BI Desktop file has a sensitivity label applied, is that bottom left. It's also how you can toggle changing the sensitivity label and or adding one. Now that you've made a report in Power BI Desktop and applied a sensitivity label and seen what it looks like there, you're ready to go to Power BI Service. Before you do that, you need to check with your tenant administrations. If it's not yourself or your direct colleagues, then find out who in your organisation has access to the tenant. The Power BI tenant administration here, there is the option to allow users to apply sensitivity labels for Power BI content. That needs to be enabled in order to place a Power BI report with a label into the tenant. So I've gone ahead, I've turned on the tenant setting to allow me to publish reports with labels. I've gone ahead and created a report that has a label and published it up to my workspace. And this is what it will look like. So you see far right, you have the sensitivity label column. And this is where you can see the label that's been applied. And that can be applied to a dashboard, a report, or a data set and data flow. So in this case, I'm looking at a report and a data set, and they've both got the confidential label applied. If I then open the report, so if I wanted to know a specific report I'm in it, or a user sent me a screenshot, the top of the screen is where you see what sensitivity label has been applied, right next to the title of the report. And then you can select the drop down and you'll see more details as well as the sensitivity label within that screen. So now you've seen Power BI Desktop and how we publish reports up. I want to tell you about a couple of gotchas when you're playing in that space. So the main gotchas to be aware of is a Power BI report with a sensitivity label applied. Even if that label said, okay, only accessible by the finance department, if someone outside the finance department has access to that Power BI workspace, they can access the report. So the security that sensitivity labels gives you doesn't block you from accessing the contents inside Power BI. So be very wary when you're talking about sensitivity labels and security. That doesn't apply when you're in Power BI service looking at the Power BI artifacts. So it's only when you export the data out to, say, Excel, that's where the security will kick in, because Excel has that capability. It's that third-party / integrated office product option that you saw in the flow. It recognizes the sensitivity labels and applies a security association to them. So if someone was outside the finance department but got access to their workspace, looked at a report but went to export it to Excel, as soon as Excel loads, it will error indicating they don't have sufficient access to view the contents. So you have a little bit of security, but not extensive security. It's not going to block them viewing the report or the dashboard. So that's that second one. Exporting to Excel is where the security kicks in for a sensitivity label. Sensitivity labels are inherited. So what that means is if I have a data set that has the confidential label and I decide to create a new report off that data set, that will automatically give my report the confidential sensitivity label. If I associate it to multiple data sources that have different sensitivity labels applied, the most restrictive one or the priority one will be the one that's attached to the report. And if you're using business to business or multi-tenant scenarios, those aren't supported, unfortunately, which kind of makes sense because you're talking about your Office 365 settings, and when it's cross-tenant, different tenants, different settings. Something that I came across just before the presentation today is actually I published a new Power BI report up to the service, had a new sensitivity label that I only created about 5 minutes before. Power BI Desktop recognised the sensitivity label, but publishing it up, it didn't apply. So this is something to be mindful of. If you are publishing reports with sensitivity labels, just check they've come through. If they haven't, you can simply go into the settings and apply the label via the settings. So in Power BI Service, if you're not doing the reports in Power BI Desktop, or it's an after the fact, we've got things in service and we want to just go through and tidy them up and apply labels, in the settings, you can go through and toggle the sensitivity label. So this is on a data set, it appears here. If I open to report, that pane that pops out on the right-hand side, scroll about 3/4 of the way down, you'll see the same option to apply a sensitivity label directly within Power BI Service. And then this is the issue if you export to Excel and don't have access to that label. So that can happen if you have access to the location where the report is, but not the actual label within Office 365. So then you get blocked to say, look, you don't have access. I'm not going to show you the data. If it's yourself and you've just got multiple accounts, just toggle the sign in up the top to the correct account, and then the information will display. This is the Excel. I wanted to just draw your attention to this so you're aware. So you can see down the bottom, this is an Excel file. And for Excel, it's a little bit similar to Power BI. You've got the sensitivity in the toolbar there. So you can select that and say, I'm going to do confidential. Oh, hang on a sec. My Google's going to tell me I've got alerts. Thanks, Google. Then when you apply it to the service, you see there it's just got a dash because workbooks don't have a sensitivity label option within the service. Even if you selected the properties, you wouldn't see an option. Here's what it looks like if you were to do a downstream or upstream, depending on how you're looking at it. It takes the inheritance of the data set or data sets. So in this case, our data set is confidential. I created a new report. As I go to save that report, it's automatically going to tell me the data set has a sensitivity label confidential. That's going to get applied to the report. As soon as I save, then goes next to the title on the service. So those are the sort of places you'll see it within service and how it works in terms of inheritance. If you're analyzing with Excel, so I've got Excel here. I'm going into load from the Power BI dataset. The Power BI dataset pane, I guess you'd call it, is really handy in that it will show the sensitivity label within the pane. So you know straight away what sensitivity labels are sitting on your tenant for your data sets. And then once you've selected them, it will go apply that to the Excel file. So we've selected a data set that's confidential. We get an indication that we're using a data set with a sensitivity label applied, and the sensitivity label is then associated with the Excel file. So that's kind of handy. You don't have to worry about the users connecting to a data set. It's got a label applied, and then the label just disappears when they analyze in Excel because it keeps it there. It's inheriting it effectively across. And where there's multiple labels, then you've got to look at which label takes priority. So the next thing I want to get into, in case, and I should probably check, does anyone have any questions? Feel free to just interrupt, or if I'm going a bit quick, just let me know. I have a tendency to talk pretty fast sometimes. But yeah, if anything's not clear, just come off mute, type it in the chat, and we'll try and cover off your questions as best as possible. But now that we've covered Power BI, we're going to switch into Purview. So if you've not seen Azure Purview, I recommend spinning it up to have a bit of a look, but don't leave it up for too long because it's going to cost you a bucket of money, as I found out. So you can, with Purview, you've got the option to view sensitivity labels, and you can also automatically apply sensitivity labels, which is really cool. I'm not going to do the automatically applying today. I'm more going to show you what they look like in Purview, where you can find them, what filtering you can do. So within Purview, I've taken my Power BI tenant and I've scanned it. So these are some of the files you saw earlier. When you scan it in Purview, you'll go into the data catalog and then you can browse the assets. And the thing that's really cool is you get to actually this label down here, even though it's not called sensitivity label, that's what it is. It's a sensitivity label filter. So it's automatically telling me that across my tenant that I've scanned and any other area I've scanned, I have 3 sensitivity labels applied. And I've just used them to split different teams so I can easily recognize them for my demos. But straight away, I get the option to go, right, I need to look for any data sets the organization has that are confidential, or we might be looking at any reports that the finance area has access to. So I might pick the finance team, or in my case, the NCIS team. And that way, this will filter the information we're seeing here on the right. And you can also see that the sensitivity label is called out next to the title of the report or the data set. 2 things it doesn't cover: Excel workbooks, because sensitivity labels don't apply. So even if you scan them with Purview, Purview will just kind of ignore the fact that workbooks exist. Bit of a bummer, but just be mindful of that. And that's the information you can see here. So if we would delve into a particular asset, we would see the sensitivity label straight next to the name of the asset itself. So it doesn't appear in the overview or the properties, it appears next to the actual name. So if you're in Purview and you're looking through your Power BI reports and your artifacts and your tenancy, or you've got some data analysts doing some work and they want to have a look at the data and they go, hey, it's got this label applied, do I have access? you might want to indicate to them what the label is and what that means. And if you've applied security specific to that label, then they'll be able to use that when they're looking through the data assets on Purview to understand what they can and can't use and what's available to them in their roles. So a data set and a report are very similar. So the Power BI report to the right and data set pretty much the same. And data flows and dashboards would be similar again when you're looking at sensitivity labels because they allow sensitivity labels. And then this is just an example to let you know that even though my workspace has a workbook, Purview doesn't have the workbook. And so that's sort of the main thing I wanted to go through there, is to look at sensitivity label maintenance and management. So it's all done through Office 365. Even though we're applying it in Power BI, it is an Office 365 setting. When you're looking at something like Azure SQL, if you're pulling in Power BI from Azure SQL, even though it has sensitivity labels, they are different. They are Azure sensitivity labels, so they are not the Office 365 ones. So things like that, inheritance from the data source, it won't come through into the Power BI report. So if I connect a Power BI report to Azure SQL and Azure SQL has a sensitivity label, that won't be inherited by the Power BI report because it's not an Office 365 sensitivity label. In the same way how Purview displays it, it won't display it in the way you think because it's not an Office 365 one. We also looked at how it's going to appear inside Power BI. So you've got mainly Power BI desktop and Power BI service, as well as the paginated reports. You won't see it in the on-prem, unfortunately. And when you do see it in service, there's a few little gotchas. So it's there, but it's not quite 100%. But when you're looking at your governance and what you want to roll out in your org, it's definitely a helpful tool to be able to apply some metadata on your data artifacts to say, hey, organization, treat this with caution, it's confidential, or no, this information is entirely public and you can release it out as you need to. So sensitivity labels might be a really good way to fast track and smoothen some of your governance processes. It also makes it more understandable for people in your org as to what they can do, what data sets they can use, what that means. So it's really handy to use sensitivity labels for that. I wouldn't necessarily use them for the security context as yet. I would treat them more as just a label inside Power BI because the security is not quite there and people might start to rely on it if they assume that it behaves like Office 365. But until it gets a little bit more mature in the data space, not so much. We talked about a couple of the gotchas. So if you are exporting to Excel, the security kicks in. If you're just directly accessing the reports on the service, you won't have any security other than your actual Power BI workspace security. And then we also talked about the licensing and the auto labeling. I mentioned it, I didn't go through it, but if you did want to look at it in more detail, I've included some links here because auto labeling might be something you want to do to try and enforce your governance policy. And I haven't included it in my slides, but if you wanted to look at how this label's been applied across your organization, even though when you click the link earlier when I was publishing the policy, there's an option to view a report. If you were to look at that report, it doesn't actually show the information from Power BI. It only shows it from SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams. So you could have a Power BI report with sensitivity label applied in your Power BI tenant, and it's not going to show up on that report to say this label's been applied in your org. So some of those dashboards and reports that are available for sensitivity labels don't apply to the data landscape. In the same way, when you want to audit how are the labels used, where are they used, you're going to want to look at things like the Office 365 Activity Explorer and basically trawl through audit logs to see where your labeling's been applied. Or if you're using Purview, that might be the way you audit and govern and check. Is this label being applied? How many reports are using it across our tenant? So there are ways. It's just not ideal when you're clicking through the screens and you go, oh, great, there's a dashboard. And you load the dashboard and you're like, why is my Power BI report not there? I have a label applied. Why is it not showing up? Because you've got to remember the context of that dashboard is Office 365, not so much Power Platform. So there are times where some of the functionality and features works really well. And there are other times where it's kind of like you think something's gone wrong, but really it hasn't gone wrong. It's just not quite there yet for the purpose you're using it for. And sensitivity labels has been around for a couple of years. Like, it's been in the Office 365 world for a lot longer, and it's been in the Power Platform world, I think, for, was it close to 2 years now, but it hasn't really, I don't think it's really come, what do you call it, mainstream or readily used by many people. I think with the introduction of Purview into the data world as a metadata management, visibility and governance tooling, I think now the sensitivity labels will start getting used more and more and more. So hopefully today you've been able to see how you create the label, how you can use it and see it in Power BI, but also if your org has applied labels or you join somewhere that's using labels, how you can recognize the label that's applied and then potentially see more information about it, or work with your global admin or your cloud admin to get some more set up for your org. So I just want to say, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this. Sensitivity labels for me was something I had a bit of spare time with work where I wasn't on client sites. So I was able to just dive in and have a look at what they look like across the different tools. And it was really interesting to see from a data professional to go, oh, this is how it looks in Excel, this is how it looks in Word, and then go, surely Power BI will do the same. Not quite. And then like, oh, okay, can't use it for security, but can use it as a label. And then also to know that Purview will have the information there as well is really, really cool. But you can just see how powerful it could be, but also how many gotchas it could also encounter. I only found a new one today where I published one with a brand new label, only 5 minutes in the tenant, and it just didn't recognize it in service straight away. So hopefully that's helped you all today. And if you have any questions, happy to try and answer them as best as possible. I should point out, if you delete a label, it's kind of still there for a little bit, but as people start to access the reports or Excel, things will start to somewhat break because there's no label available within Office 365. It doesn't really know what to do. I haven't directly deleted a label, so I can't demonstrate that today. But if anyone wants to know how that works, I'm happy to give it a go on my demo tenant and send back the feedback as to what that looks like. But yeah, so that's me for today.
Great, Heidi. If anyone has any questions for Heidi, please feel free to unmute or drop your questions in the chat.
Hi, Heidi. Great presentation. I have one.
Sure.
I have one question. Is sensitivity labels, does that replace row-level security, applying row-level security in the data model, or is this something that just complements that?
No, yeah, absolutely not. Does not replace row-level security at all. It's more of a complement. And I would see it as more of a label, because you think that row-level security gives you down to the cell level security. So you can go row object, whereas the sensitivity label is more saying this Power BI report, all the data contained in it, we treat with this label. So if you think about it, when you're accessing data inside a data model, or it might be an on-prem tabular model, multidimensional, or you might have grabbed some Excel files and everything, then when you apply a sensitivity label to the report, you have to consider what the sensitivity is of the underlying data combined. So where that data combined reaches a certain sensitivity, that's what you want to put on the report. As I said, sensitivity labels, even though they've got the word sensitivity in them, it's really just a label. So you can use it in any way your governance strategy helps you. So you might apply it saying, all right, I've included HR employee details in this Power BI report. And I've also included, say, their address. So I might say this is sensitive personal report because I've included a personal piece of information like a residential address. But you may say, okay, I've only got head counts, like we've got 10 staff, and how many weeks of the year that means we have resources available. And that in itself is not potentially not as sensitive. So you might just say that's just internal to the org, but it in no way impacts your row level security, because the person accessing the report, that report could be accessed by anyone that has access to the workspace or the app, whereas the underlying data elements within the report are more restrictive. So treat them as in conjunction and at different layers, because The sensitivity label is the dashboard, the data flow, the report, whereas the actual data, it could be very different. So you want your row level security to allow the granular, but the label to just be a high level, hey, this is what's in this report. And it might even be you just want to see it so that if someone takes a screenshot and sends it, or they export the information, that you have a level of labeling applied so you know, hey, hang on a minute, that data has come from this report, which is considered sensitive. So it gives you that level of protection, whereas your row level security will tell you the user has access to the data, but once they export it and they go send it to someone, you've got nothing there to indicate, hey, this is restricted to certain people only. So I would say in conjunction with, but not replacing.
Right, got it. Thank you.
Hopefully that answers.
Do we have any more questions?
Heidi, will you be, I know it's quite late over there, but will you be around to answer any questions if there are any questions on the chat?
Yeah, I will stick around for Ginger's presentation.
Awesome. Okay, so if there are any more questions for Heidi, please feel free to put it on the chat.
Yeah, and if you don't reach me today, or if you don't use Twitter and you can't reach me on Twitter, just send a message through to the organisers, and they have my contact details, so they can send it through to me, and then I can get back to you. Or check out my blog at heidihasting.com. You can reach me on there as well. I'm more than happy to help. Time zone wise, I am in Australia, so I might delay response.
Great. Thanks a lot, Heidi, for the very insightful session on sensitivity labels. Next, we have Ginger Grant, who will be speaking on implementing a self-service Power BI solution. I believe Heidi's session would tie in very well with this. So Ginger is a data platform MVP who provides consulting services in advanced analytics solutions, including machine learning, data warehousing, and Power BI. She's an author of articles, books, and at desertilesql.com, and uses her Microsoft certified trainer skills to provide data platform training in topics such as Python, R, and Azure machine learning. Ginger, we do appreciate you joining us from the other end of the world in Austin, Texas. We do know it's rather early over there, so we do appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to us. Ginger, over to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. I haven't made it over to Sri Lanka yet, and I'm looking forward to doing more traveling now that things have opened up a bit. So I assume that you can see my screen at this point. Yes? Great. So I'm going to be talking. Great. So I'm going to talk about implementing a self-service Power BI solution. And this has really come up because I've had a number of clients that say, yeah, we want our business users to be able to write reports. And despite what marketing information that you might hear otherwise, this does involve a conscious effort on those of us who put together the entire Power BI solution to develop an environment in which that business users can become more successful. So I wanted to go over and talk about the things that you need to do to make this really work out well. All right, a little bit about me. I already got a great intro, so no need to add to it, but I wanted to add that if you have any questions after the event and you want to get a hold of me, again, like Heidi, I'm on Twitter way too much at Desert Isle SQL, so feel free to reach out to me there should you have any additional questions about anything Power BI, whether or not we're talking about it today. All right, so how did you develop a real self-service Power BI solution? So it's basically, I've looked at it as there's four things that you really need to ensure that you have. Well, the first, which of course is the most important, is a friendly data model. You have to have a data model presented in a way that users can figure out how to use it. That's not overly complicated, has names that people recognize and understand, and you create enough supportive information so that people can find meaning for it. And the next thing I would say is themes. There is definitely in most organizations a desire for people to use a certain set of colors and fonts, and people aren't going to do that unless you've got that developed. And then reusable templates. When people are first starting out, they're like, I don't know what I should do. And to provide them that guidance, that guidelines in forms of a template that basically says, okay, you're connected to the data set now, you've got everything set up to start doing your report. They find that really, really helpful. The last thing I want to cover is a feedback loop, because you need to work with the people that are doing self-service BI to make sure that you're meeting their needs and improving the process, because it's never perfect out of the box. So, friendly data model. What do you need to do to make sure your data model is indeed friendly? Well, hide all the keys, for starters. I know this kind of thing takes a lot of time, stuff that people talk about in class, and sometimes people do it and sometimes they blow it off. But hiding all the keys just prevents people from asking a lot of questions about things that they don't need to know about. Also, in Power BI, you can put hover over descriptions on labels and tables. Yeah, you do want to do this. I realize it's very time consuming to be able to enter the descriptions of various things, but maybe you can get an intern or somebody to do it for you. But describing the different components and what they contain is really helpful for people who are starting out and haven't a clue, especially as we're talking about business users here. And the other thing that it's important to do in your description is describe the DAX. Don't tell people just what the DAX code is. Business users are not going to be able to understand that at all. You might want to have in your descriptions things like, standard calculation used to compute sales or enrollments or whatever business specific information that the DAX is supposed to contain. Maybe you, in your descriptions, you list source system. This comes from our ERP solution. This comes from Salesforce. Wherever your data comes from, give people an idea to give them more confidence that this is the stuff that they want to use. Develop consistent names for like items. So if you are developing a whole bunch of different DAX related items, make sure that your names are consistent. Try not to make them so long that the only unique elements is on the right hand side. That way, because people can't see that. So think about these sorts of things when you are creating your data model and anticipate the questions that you might receive and try to design the model to answer them so that you don't have to answer the questions after the fact. It's always a goal, never quite that achievable, but it's always a good idea. All right, whoops. Now, if you are talking about developing a theme, this is getting to be more and more important in developing Power BI reports, because everybody seems to have really specific ideas about what they want. This is the process that I go through to ensure that I've got things set up appropriately. It is a little bit of a step to be able to do these, but this is how you make this work. So I start with Power BI tips, and they have a tool that helps me generate my theme. I customize it within Power BI, tweak it, modify it there, and then I break down, edit the JSON, because there's really no substitute for going through and adding all the JSON into your theme so that it applies the various elements appropriately. So when it comes to editing the JSON, what you're trying to do is you're trying to develop default formatting that matches your style guidelines for all elements. So people don't have to think, how big should this card be? What is the font size that I should use for a table or a matrix? Because it should just be defaulted to whatever is appropriate. And using the right colors that have been decided upon so that you have a consistent look and feel, and people don't have to feel bad when they create reports and they look like crap. There is a really good repo that I am going to share with you here in a minute. And Matt Rudy has basically gone through and done a lot of work on the Power BI theme templates and what they need to contain. And I will put this link in chat as well so that you have it because it's very helpful for editing the themes. So, and we'll take a look at that, like I said, in a minute. All right, so let's actually, now that minute is up, so we'll talk about developing themes. So for that, like I said, first I start out with Power BI tips. They have this advanced theme generator that is a really good starting place for creating your theme. So it contains a lot of the start default elements that you will need. And it's a pretty good way of getting started to creating that theme. Now, just to kind of review the kinds of things that I'm seeing in my environment now, it used to be that I used to pull people's colors off their website and then figure out, that way if somebody asked me, hey, what are the colors? I will just look at their website and say they came from the website so that no one could say that they didn't like them, or if they did, then it's like, well, then go redesign the website. So I'm seeing a lot of elements like this where a company, this is a big healthcare company in the US, comes up and they give you what they want their colors to be. So you define a color. And then a lot of times they also say that what fonts they want to use. So here they're saying that they want Georgia as the font that's going to be used. And so I need to make sure that my theme includes that. So that's these are the guidelines that I'm going to be using to figure out how to generate my theme. So for my theme, what I'm going to do is I am going to go through and use this as my guideline and copy the different elements from here and then put them into the theme generator. And again, shout out to these guys for creating this. This was Seth and Mike put this website together. Really great website's got a wonderful a lot of Power BI stuff. So for creating my theme, I'm going to just copy the hex values out of my different elements here, and I'm just going to do the multiple inputs. So I can just copy them from the guidelines that I have. And it's important to make sure that you have these in the right order so that the colors will come out in the order that they have specified them. And I was working with a junior developer recently, and he said, man, with a different client, and he's like, I don't like these colors at all. And I said, well, that's nice and all, but nobody cares because they have marketing people that have selected these. So yeah, and honestly, he's right. They are hideous, but unless they violate guidelines for accessibility for people who are colorblind, these are the ones I use. So these are the colors again from this website. I just pasted them in there. So now I'm on to the properties. And so the chart picker, these have all the properties that are used throughout the theme. So I can set them here and then they'll be able to be set throughout. One of the things that I want to make sure that I set up is anything that has to do with my font because they have specified Georgia. I think the smallest font should never be smaller than 10 because people have difficulty seeing elements that are smaller than that. So I'll go ahead and set that. The data colors, again, it's always going to use that, but if I want my default, I'm going to use this navy blue. Whether or not I want data labels all turned on, I can set up that. Again, I'm going to change my font to Georgia. Titles, again, I think they always should be 10 at a minimum, and then set that to Georgia. Background, Go ahead and set that on, set that up to a pale gray color just so that it's not white. Transparency, I'll do 50%. And then leave the other elements alone. So this is what I've got for my starter theme. So I'm going to go ahead and download it. So I'm going to call it and so save as. Oops, and I rewrote it over it. So this is my starter theme. So then the next thing I'm going to do is kind of fix this up using Power BI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up a Power BI report that I've got here. And I'm going to go ahead and import my theme. So again, going to view and then browse for themes and go to where I put it and add that in here just to show you what my themes are looking at. And I do need to change some of the elements I've got. I do have the labels showing up, everything showing up in Georgia, but I don't have everything showing up the way that I want it. These cards, their font is too small, so I'm going to need to do some modification. So the first level of modification that I'm going to do is I'm going to do customize current theme. And in this instance, it's going to give my theme a name. So I'm going to probably want to call this like perhaps the name of my company. And so this is showing the theme colors. Now these are the sentiment colors. These are going to become an issue for those who are colorblind. So I'm probably going to want to change these to things that people who are more color sensitive can see. So like a very dark color, which is still red, but then you can definitely see the contrast between the two. Advanced first level elements. These are not. These are basically saying that these are the ones that they're going to use. These, again, don't follow my color scheme, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that they match those elements. And I'll leave these lighter ones because that's fine. Text, I want to make sure that it's always Georgia. My title, again, I'm setting this so that it always says Georgia, so the places that didn't set. Title, that I think that's kind of, I'll leave that. Cards and KPIs. Again, setting all of this to Georgia, and yes, that's appropriate size for cards. Tab headers, again, Georgia. So for visuals, I can leave this background color. I can choose to set borders, add headers, tooltips. If I want my tooltips to be different colors, I can do that. The page, I could choose to add wallpaper or a page background. It's unfortunately here, it doesn't allow me to add a color, which I would really prefer to a bitmap or a background JPEG, which I would prefer to do. So I'm going to leave this alone. Filter pane. Now, I really like giving this a color, so that way people can see the fact that it exists. So I tend to generally set this so that it's nice and obvious that, hey, there's a filter there. And I'm just going to go ahead and say apply. And notice now I've got this really bright green filter, but I'm going to probably want to change these because I don't want all of the rest of these to be green. So I'm going to go ahead and in my themes, though, I'm going to say that I want to save my current theme. So I'm going to call this Acme Theme 2. Probably still want to do some, I'll call this Sri Lanka Theme 2. Probably still want to do some tweaking on this and make it so that it works a lot better. So for my final tweaking, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to go ahead and start editing my JSON. So I tend to do that in Notepad++. So open up that theme. And just gives you an idea of what we're going to see so far for the theme, and then what it's going to look like after we start tweaking it. So they doesn't always end up being formatted pretty, but that's not an issue. So I use a JSON formatter of some kind. Bunch of them on it. I just basically pick the first one that pops up in my browser. So I'll just paste it in here, and then it fixes it for me so that I can actually read it. So once I've got it formatted like this, I can tell I've got like way too many colors added. So I'll just go ahead and delete these. I don't know why this ends up happening. And then I'm going to want to go through and use the JSON editor. Excuse me. Then I'm going to use the information that we have from GitHub to start looking at fixing the elements and making it exactly how I wanted it. So got my little Teams thing in the way. So here I'm going to be looking at adding in, say, formatting cards, pasting in these different templates into my theme to adding them. I do this one at a time because, as you might guess by looking at this stuff, that adding in JSON is kind of problematic, and I want to make sure that I do it right. I'll be changing this font family and colors as well. And as soon as I have this pasted in my JSON file, which I've got here in Notepad, I'm going to test it in Power BI to make sure that I created something that that won't blow up on me. So I can make sure that I go through and edit this so that it will work appropriately. So just start pasting them in here and then testing it to make sure that it works. And so I have a theme that works out perfectly to present what I want, so how everything I want to be formatted. So it does take quite a bit of time actually to do this, and many, many pages of templates. This is going to end up being, I don't know, at least 10,000 lines to have things formatted, just so, especially if they've got a picky style guide, like the one that I showed you that has all those text as Georgia that you have to do. So once I have all of that going on, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to create a theme that, create a template that implements it. So got my theme created, and now I want to create a template. So I want to provide a starting space. I want to demonstrate the standards, and I want to include my data source connections so that users don't have to worry about any of that. They just open up the PBIT file and then they're good to go. So for example, what I have here is my template. And in my template, I have included what people need to have in their Power BI template. So I've got my data connection already made. So notice that I've got it as a Power BI data set connection that's already made, so that it's already there. Nobody has to tweak it. I've got my backgrounds added to my pages. So here I've got a gradient of a gray to white added. I've got my colors added, and then I'm showing them how we want in this organization to organize our Power BI reports. We want to have cards at the tops. Here's slicers that we want to have on the right hand side, showing here the styles that we have, where I have got it on the left, slicers on the right, showing people how to do these different items so that they don't have to worry about, shoot, how do I make that work? They've got it, a working example that's connected to the existing data sets, so they don't have to worry about how to do that. And then, just give people the idea of, how to use a map, how to do different design elements that people like to use, and then they have no idea how. So anything that you want people to use as a guide, you can show them how to do it. Here I'm illustrating how to do a drill down, because users don't understand that. So I'm showing them, how to do that so that I can reference that, and showing them an alternate style that they could use for drop downs. Showed them how to do. I could have a fancy tooltip in here so that they can see it. Q&A. I want to show people how to use some of the more advanced elements of Power BI that they may not understand. So again, showing them, hey, this is how to use Q&A. This is what a key influencer visual is, by giving them an example that works in their environment and something that they can actually use. Now, how to create templates, it's basically, I just created a report. Sometimes I go through and type like examples for telling people, describing it in text boxes so that they have an idea of how to make it work. And then when I want to make, update this template, I make sure that I just do a save as and create this as a template file, a PBIT file. And then I provide this TBIT file to everybody in the organization and saying, this is your starting point. So automatically they are successful because they have a connection to the data set. They have an idea of how to create reports, and they can just start deleting your stuff and putting their stuff in. So one of the other things that I put in, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. So now I've got a sample template file. So I'm going to, just go ahead and provide this to people, give them the ability to, start successful. If I have any custom visuals that we routinely use in our organization, I'll make sure that they list here as well. So just give people an idea of, hey, how should this all work? And then, within the model, I do have all my keys turned off, so that people don't have to worry about things that are not anything that they need to do any kind of work on. I put my calculations here. I used to always do that, but I am of a different mindset now, because I've noticed that for very large data sets, there is a performance hit that's I see when using calculate tables. So now I'm a little bit more circumspect. The other thing that you're going to want to do if you do have a lot of calculations is figure out how to organize it in a way that's meaningful for people. I know I worked with one client and they were all about putting everything into folders. I find that annoying, because then I just have to open up a bunch of folders to see calculations. But you might also, and again, this does help performance, funny enough, is start putting your calculations perhaps in the tables where people might think to use them. So that, you might have calculations within your sales table that relate to sales so that people would find them easier to use. Again, if you do have very large data sets, there is actually a performance boost for that. But figure out how you're going to organize things in a way that is valuable for people, so that they don't have to continually guess about, how to design a report, because it's set up for them. So, give them a couple of styles of things to use. The other thing that I added here too is I added a drill through. So if someone says, I want to do a drill through, how do I do that? I've got a sample here that I've set up for region so that they can see how to do that. So anything that somebody might be interested in doing, or, may think is kind of hard and tricky, I will give them a sample of it in the template so that they don't have to wonder, well, can I do that? How does that work? And you can show them, walk through the steps and say, okay, this is how you make this happen. So you add, give them a real world example for their environment. And this kind of environment really helps people become more successful because they have the tools that they need to create reports. They know how to make them look good. And so now it's just a matter of dropping data in and out so that their reports provide the business reasons and that they want to see. All right, so that was my demo for that. So roles and responsibilities. This is another very important topic when you are doing self-service BI. Your users shouldn't be writing any measures. What that means is that you have to have determined the ones that they're going to use. That they're not going to know how to, well, for one thing, you're not giving them a model, which is the appropriate place to add it, but they're not going to be able to do that. That's not their level of skill. So they are going to want, when they want more measures, there's going to have to be a way for them to get them. It's not possible for them to add data. So if they want to like add an Excel spreadsheet, chances are, they won't know how to do it, even if they could. And they may not understand the model. So so you have to figure out how you are going to address these needs and make it so that people will get what they need to be able to successfully create their own reports. Because if they need a measure and it's not there, how are they going to get it? If they have to have this data from SharePoint and it's not there, how are they going to get it? And walking through so that they understand the basics of the model is important as well. So you need to provide that feedback loop. You need to, within your organization, determine how are you going to add additional measures people are going to need. What are the processes that you're going to have for adding in content? If you have to have, XYZ SharePoint table, how are people going to know to contact you? And how are you going to be able to add that into the existing model? Or are you going to do submodels? Figure that out in advance, develop a process for that. You also want to make sure that the roles and responsibilities are defined so that they know that they need to fix the source data if there are issues with the source data. Power BI is a lot of things, but it's not a data management tool that's really should be handled outside of Power BI and get people involved in the creation of the process for fixing data. And also, how are you going to set up workspaces for self-service users? Are you going to give them a dev environment? And if they want things to go to test and prod, is that something that the more experienced Power BI team is going to handle? What are you going to do? If they want to create reports and they want to release them to the entire organization, what steps are you going to include to make them successful at that? Are you going to give them that capability? And for self-service BI, maybe not. Depends on the skill level of your users. Maybe that's something that they coordinate with the Power BI team to be able to use a release structure that follows what you have in your current environment. You're going to have to figure out answers to these kinds of questions on your feedback loop to really make this into an very successful environment so that people can do what they need to do, not only to create a report, but to give it to the world so that you have the ability to release what they create as well, rather than just leave it in a workspace, because then you get into, you don't want to have the entire planet have access to a given workspace. So keep that in mind as well. All right, so in summary, what you want to do to make sure that people are successful is take time to make your model friendly. Make sure that the names have spaces in them, don't have abbreviations, because you want the QA to work. If people can't figure out anything else, they'll be able to figure out Q&A. And this is especially going to be useful as Microsoft is working on making DAX more like Q&A so that you can just type something out and get a DAX calculation. This is something that they are talking about now. There's some blogs about it. And since this is the goal, then having friendly names will help DAX get created in the future, which is awesome. But we have to do what we need to do to support that. Develop the theme so that you've got a consistent look and feel. You don't want to have reports look like that people don't know what they're doing. They won't have any confidence. It also doesn't transmit a common look and feel to reports throughout the organization. So you want to make sure that you develop a theme that follows corporate design standards so everybody's reports look good, so people will start using them. You want to give people a usable template, a template that implements the theme, contains examples of different reporting techniques that beginning users will have no clue, giving them examples about common visuals, provide them guidelines to how you want them to lay it out so that they don't, do things that aren't very smart, because you show them the way that it should be done so that it'll look nice and provide meaningful information to people. And lastly, you need to develop a process for adding and releases, that feedback loop, so that when things aren't there, because users always want something else, right? That you provide people the ability to add the information that is needed so that they will be able to be successful in their solutions because it has everything that they need. And with that, I have left some time for questions, just in case you to support anything that you may have. So let me know if you have any questions. Just take yourself off mute. I'd be happy to answer them.
Ginger, I've actually got a question. Once the users import a template, are they able to customize it, or are they restricted?
So when they import a template, it is possible for them to create a new one by just saving the new report as another template. So if I have, like, if I make this as a template, all I have to do is say file and then save as, and then it's a new template. To be honest, users don't often do this because they don't know that you can do that. But if you want them to start adding elements to the template, or if you think that they should develop the report formats for their area, they could always save another template. But the template's not going to change things like data connections or the theme, because that's probably beyond what they're going to be doing. So they may add a whole bunch more tabs that show different examples of how they do things in their department. But yeah, they have added, if they want to create additional templates that because they know what users need, and they can provide even more guidelines in the template. And I will say that setting stuff like this up, where you've got examples and things like that work, is really time consuming. So if somebody would update the template with some more examples, that would be awesome, because it takes so much time to set all this stuff up.
So could they override some of the colors that are specified in the template, or would they have to?
And so that would be an issue, because as you know, if I go through here and I say that, hey, I want this color to be, whatever, then it's going to be. But again, hopefully that if people are smart enough to create their own templates, they tend not to. They generally speaking, they know a little bit about themes as well. But yes, it is possible for them to screw up a template. Yes, absolutely. So hopefully there's guidelines in place when you're doing that. But again, this gets into a review process for when you publish it. There needs to be, this is an education process, because business users just know that, we can't use Excel anymore, so we have to use this Power BI thing. I hear that a lot. And then just figuring out a way that they can be successful at that by giving them everything that they need. So, and I found that one thing that really helps when doing this is I do walkthrough sessions with something that people have, like, well, how do I do? And then just basically create a report for them. Because if you have a template and you've got all of the DAX created, as an experienced Power BI user, you can bang out a report in no time at all. You just need to know what fields that they're looking at. Or you may find that those working sessions is a way to identify additional DAX elements that you need to add. So.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Any other questions about this? this is, I see getting to be a bigger and bigger deal. I've done 4 different sessions in the past couple of months with different clients with a goal of them doing self-service BI. And it's not enough to just basically say, yeah, here's the model's done, we're good, bye. So it's definitely something that I'm sure that you'll see more of in the future if you haven't started seeing it yet.
On a related note, Ginger, have you come across situations where where you create templates in the form of templates to help users get started with data models rather than reports? With a calendar table in there or any other tables that they'll have to have so that they can build on top of that and add whatever else that they want to.
So I haven't seen that be that successful. Because what people want and good data model design doesn't necessarily all add up. I mean, I if it's something like where you're working with a group of Power BI people who are going to be supporting Power BI, then, hey, you give them a model and then, work with them to develop a model. And then if the model needs to be extended, hopefully they know enough to do it. But I don't see, one of the things that I see wrong with a lot of the self-service stuff that I see for business users is they don't know data modeling. So if you've got Power BI users, hey, here's an existing model, you might want to add it. But business users don't know any of that. And if you give them all that stuff, they tend to create things that are unsupportable and don't scale over time. So I would watch it. But if you have Power BI users, yeah, start off with a decent model and keep on going.
Right. Got it. Thank you. If there are more questions for Ginger or even for Heidi, you can put it up on the put it down on the chat, or you can even unmute and ask the questions.
If we don't have any questions, we can give people 4 minutes back. So I hope that you have a good rest of your evening in Sri Lanka. What's the weather like there?
Mostly hot, sunny, and a little bit of rain here and there.
Yeah. Do you have a rainy season?
We do have, but not right now. Yeah, but it comes and goes, the rainy season. Yeah, these few days it has been mostly sunny and hot.
Well, hopefully in the evening people can get out and enjoy their evening without being so overheated, right?
Hopefully, yeah. All right, then, Darren, would you like to close? Oh, Warren?
Yep. So thank you, Ginger, for that very insightful session. I know I do look forward to using the Power BI tips to generate a few templates. I also would like to thank Heidi for sticking around and for joining us from Adelaide, where it's rather late. And yeah, thanks, Ginger, as well, once again, for the early start. And finally, just want to thank all our attendees for joining. I know there are quite a few disruptions with the power supplies, so we do appreciate all of you joining. And we do have an announcement. So all the previous sessions are available on the Sri Lanka Power BI community YouTube channel. So if you have missed them, please do feel free to visit the channel and watch some of the previous sessions. And if anyone missed today's session, that should be up shortly. So we do look forward to seeing you next time. So have a great evening, and Ginger, have a great day.
Thank you.
You, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.